morning sun peeked through the blinds of Karoline Leavitt's Washington, D.C. apartment as she sipped her coffee and reviewed her notes. Today was not just any day. In 6 hours, she would be sitting across from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on America Tonight, one of the most watched political talk shows in the country. Karoline, at 28 years old, had already built an impressive career. Growing up in New Hampshire, she had learned the value of hard work from her parents who ran a small family business. After graduating college, she had served as an assistant press secretary in the Trump White House and later as the communications director for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Now, she was making a name for herself as a strong voice for conservative values. Her phone buzzed with a message from her producer. Confirmed. AOC will be discussing her new economic proposal. Be ready. Karoline took a deep breath. She knew Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was a powerful speaker with a huge following. The Congresswoman from New York was known for her fiery rhetoric and sharp criticism of traditional American policies. This isn't about personalities, Karoline reminded herself as she gathered her research papers. This is about ideas and values. Her apartment walls held framed photos of her family, her hometown, and her standing beside political figures she admired. A small American flag sat on her desk, a gift from her grandfather who had served in the military. For Karoline, it wasn't just a symbol. It represented real sacrifices made by real people. After showering and dressing in a crisp blue blazer, she called her mother. "Are you nervous?" her mother asked. "A little," Karoline admitted. "But I'm prepared. I've studied the numbers, the policies, the history. Just be yourself," her mother advised. "You believe in what you're saying, that will show." As she hung up, Karoline's assistant, Miguel, arrived to drive her to a pre-show meeting. The show's producers called, Miguel said as they navigated through D.C. traffic. They want to focus on AOC's comments from yesterday about America being fundamentally broken. Karoline nodded. She had watched that interview. The Congresswoman had spoken passionately about inequality, claiming the American system was designed to favor the wealthy and powerful while leaving others behind. "Those are strong words," Karoline said, "but I think she's missing the bigger picture." In the car, she reviewed the facts and figures on her tablet. Economic mobility statistics, small business growth, immigration rates, innovation indexes. These weren't just abstract concepts to her. Each number represented real American stories. People who had overcome challenges, built businesses, created jobs, and pursued dreams. At the network building, Karoline was shown to a small preparation room. The walls were lined with television screens showing different news channels. A makeup artist worked on her face while she continued reviewing her notes. "The Congresswoman just arrived," a production assistant announced. "You'll both be on in 90 minutes. Karoline thanked the makeup artist and stood alone in the room. She practiced a few key points aloud, keeping her tone measured and clear. She wasn't interested in creating viral moments through anger or attacks. Her strength, she believed, was in staying calm and focused on facts. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her former boss. "Remember, when they go low, you go high, with better facts." She smiled. That was exactly her plan. Across the building, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in her own preparation room. The Congresswoman from New York had risen to fame quickly, becoming one of the most recognizable progressive voices in American politics. Her passionate speeches about economic justice, climate change, and healthcare had earned her millions of followers and also many critics. Today, AOC was dressed in a white pantsuit, her signature red lipstick perfectly applied. Her staff surrounded her, reviewing talking points about her latest proposal for economic reform. "Leavitt will try to paint you as anti-American," one advisor warned. "I'm not anti-American," AOC replied firmly. "I'm fighting for an America that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. There's a difference between criticizing policies and criticizing a country." Her assistant nodded. "Just be ready. She'll come with a lot of traditional America is already great talking points," AOC nodded confidently. "And I'll come with reality." Meanwhile, in the studio, the set was being prepared. America Tonight prided itself on being a forum where different political views could be expressed. The oval table where guests sat was designed to create a sense of equality. The backdrop featured an artistic rendering of the American flag, stylized to appear both traditional and modern. The host, veteran journalist Robert Chen, reviewed his questions. With 30 years of experience, Chen had moderated countless political debates. He knew tonight's discussion had all the ingredients to become explosive. "Let's make sure the microphone levels are balanced," he instructed the sound engineer. "I want to hear both guests clearly." As the clock ticked closer to airtime, both women were led to the green room where they would wait until called to the set. Their first meeting was brief and professionally polite. Congresswoman Karoline nodded with a small smile. Ms. Leavitt, AOC, returned with equal formality. They sat on opposite ends of the room, each surrounded by their own small team of advisors who whispered last-minute suggestions. The show's executive producer entered. "Ladies, we're expecting our highest viewership of the season tonight. The format will be a 15-minute segment. Robert will begin with questions for each of you about your general vision for America's future, then move to specific policy areas." Both women nodded their understanding. As the minutes counted down, Karoline felt a calm settling over her. She had faced challenging situations before. During her time in the White House press office, she had learned how to handle pressure. She believed deeply in the points she would make tonight. From her seat, she glanced at AOC, who was reviewing notes on her phone. Karoline didn't dislike the Congresswoman personally. In fact, she respected anyone who fought passionately for their beliefs. They just had fundamentally different views of what made America work. A production assistant appeared at the door. 2 minutes, everyone." The makeup artists rushed in for final touches. Microphones were clipped to lapels. Water glasses were filled. "Good luck," Miguel whispered to Karoline. She nodded, standing up and straightening her blazer. This wasn't about luck. It was about preparation and conviction. The studio lights were bright as Karoline and AOC were led to their seats. The camera crew made final adjustments. Robert Chen sat between them, shuffling his note cards. "Welcome to both of you," he said warmly during the commercial break. "Thank you for having us." They replied almost in unison, then exchanged brief looks of surprise at their synchronicity. The floor director counted down. 5, 4, 3. The show's dramatic theme music played. The cameras panned across the studio. "Good evening, America," Robert Chen began. "Tonight we bring together two of the most compelling young voices in American politics to discuss the fundamental question: what is the state of our nation today?" The red lights on the cameras glowed. Millions of viewers across the country leaned forward in their chairs. The stage was set. The debate that would soon go viral was about to begin. The bright studio lights cast a warm glow across the polished table where Karoline Leavitt and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat. Host Robert Chen smiled at the camera, his experienced broadcaster's voice filling the studio. "Tonight we're discussing the state of America in 2025 with two rising political voices, former Trump administration official Karoline Leavitt and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez." He turned to AOC first. "Congresswoman, yesterday you made headlines by saying America's system is fundamentally broken. Could you explain what you meant by that?" AOC leaned slightly forward, her expression serious but passionate. "Thank you, Robert. What I mean is simple. A system where 3 Americans own more wealth than the bottom half of our country is broken. Where people work full-time jobs but can't afford housing, that's broken. Where healthcare bankrupts families, that's broken." She gestured with her hands for emphasis. "These aren't just policy disagreements. These are fundamental flaws in how we've structured our economy." The Congresswoman continued, her voice rising slightly with emotion. "The American dream isn't working for most Americans anymore. That's not trashing America. That's being honest about where we are so we can fix it. Countries that truly love their people ensure they have basic needs met. We're failing at that." Robert nodded and turned to Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt, your response?" Karoline had been listening carefully, jotting brief notes. She placed her pen down and looked directly at the camera. Her voice was calm and measured. I appreciate the Congresswoman's concerns about struggling Americans. Those concerns are valid, but I strongly disagree with the conclusion that America is fundamentally broken. She smiled slightly before continuing. My grandparents came to this country with almost nothing. They worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, and eventually opened a small business. That business put my father through college, the first in his family to attend. That story isn't unique. It's the American story happening every day across our country. Karoline referenced a small note card. Last year, Americans started over 5.1 million new businesses, a record high. More than 8.7 million people escaped poverty in the last decade. And America continues to be the #1 destination for immigrants worldwide. People don't risk everything to come to a broken country. AOC shook her head slightly, clearly eager to respond. Congresswoman, Robert said, you look like you want to jump in. Those statistics don't tell the full story, AOC replied quickly. Yes, people start businesses, but most fail within 5 years because of our unfair system. Yes, people come here, but they often face exploitation. The top 1% has captured nearly all economic gains in the past 20 years, while working families fall further behind. She looked directly at Karoline. Individual success stories don't change systemic problems. It's like saying, my grandfather smoked and lived to be 95, so cigarettes aren't dangerous. The data shows America's promise is increasingly only available to the privileged few. The camera caught a slight smile forming on Karoline's lips, not mocking but confident. She had anticipated this line of argument. Let's talk about systems and data then, Karoline replied, still maintaining her composed tone. The United States ranks in the top 10 globally for social mobility, the ability to rise from poverty to prosperity. We lead the world in medical innovation, technological breakthroughs, and charitable giving. Our universities attract the brightest minds from every corner of the earth. She paused briefly. Are there problems? Absolutely. Healthcare costs too much. Housing is unaffordable in too many cities. These are serious challenges we need to address. Karoline leaned forward slightly. But the difference in our perspectives, Congresswoman, is that I see these as fixable problems within a fundamentally sound system. You see these as proof the entire American experiment is flawed. The studio felt charged with tension, but not the shouting match energy viewers might have expected. Instead, there was an intensity to the exchange of ideas. Robert sensed a powerful television moment developing. Congresswoman, how do you respond to Ms. Leavitt's distinction between fixable problems and a broken system? AOC took a sip of water before answering. The distinction matters less than the solutions. When I say the system is broken, I'm talking about how power works in America. Corporations write our laws through lobbying. Billionaires pay lower tax rates than teachers. The fossil fuel industry blocks climate action despite the science. She gestured emphatically. These aren't small glitches in a working system. They're features of a system designed to concentrate wealth and power. The camera caught Karoline making notes again, her expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. Ms. Leavitt, Robert said, you're shaking your head. With respect to the Congresswoman, Karoline replied, that narrative ignores America's most important feature, our ability to reform and improve ourselves. Civil rights, women's suffrage, environmental protections, all these came through our democratic system working as designed. She straightened in her chair. I grew up in New Hampshire, where our state motto is live free or die. That's not just a slogan, it reflects a deep American truth. We value freedom, including economic freedom, because history shows that free people solve problems better than controlled people. AOC interjected. Freedom isn't just abstract. Real freedom requires basics like healthcare and education. I agree, Karoline said, surprising both AOC and the host with her quick response. We just disagree on how to provide those things. History shows government control often creates more problems than it solves. Robert, sensing the conversation heating up, decided to focus on specific policies. Let's talk about the Congresswoman's recent proposal for a wealth tax. Congresswoman, you've suggested a 2% annual tax on wealth over $50 million. Why do you believe this is necessary? AOC's eyes lit up as she moved to her signature policy area. Because extreme wealth concentration threatens democracy itself. Just 400 Americans hold more wealth than 150 million of their fellow citizens combined. That's not just an economic problem, it's a moral failure. She continued with statistics about inequality, her voice passionate. When someone has billions while others can't afford insulin, that's not a functioning society. The camera cut to Karoline, who was listening attentively, occasionally making notes. When AOC finished, Robert turned to her. Ms. Leavitt, your thoughts on the wealth tax proposal? Karoline nodded respectfully toward AOC before answering. The Congresswoman identifies real concerns about inequality. Where we differ is the solution. She held up 3 fingers. First, wealth taxes have failed in most countries that tried. Them including France, which abandoned theirs after capital flight damaged their economy. Second, most billionaire wealth isn't in cash but in companies that employ millions of Americans. And third, history shows that giving government more resources rarely solves the problems it claims to target. The exchange continued back and forth, with both women presenting their views passionately but respectfully. Viewers at home began commenting on social media about the unusual civility of the debate, despite the stark differences in viewpoint. As the segment neared its halfway point, Robert posed a question that would shift the tone of the discussion. Congresswoman, yesterday you stated that America's founding was tainted by oppression and that we need to completely reimagine our systems. Ms. Leavitt, you visibly reacted to that clip when we showed it earlier. Could you explain why? The camera zoomed in on Karoline's face. The question had touched on something fundamental. The viewers could sense that her next words would change the entire dynamic of the debate. The studio fell silent as all eyes turned to Karoline Leavitt. Robert Chen's question about America's founding being tainted by oppression hung in the air. The producers in the control room leaned forward, sensing this could be the defining moment of the debate. Karoline took a slow, deliberate breath. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried a new intensity. Thank you for that question, Robert, she began. I had a strong reaction to those comments because they reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of what America is. She turned slightly to face AOC directly. Congresswoman, with all due respect, when you say America's founding was tainted by oppression and we need to completely reimagine our systems, you're not just criticizing policies. You're dismissing the greatest experiment in human freedom ever attempted. Karoline's expression remained composed, but her eyes conveyed deep conviction. Yes, America has committed serious wrongs. Slavery was a terrible evil. The treatment of Native Americans was often shameful. Women and minorities were denied rights they deserved. These are historical facts we must acknowledge. She paused briefly. But that's not the complete story. Not even close. The camera caught AOC shifting in her seat, clearly preparing a response. But Karoline continued, her voice steady. The genius of America isn't that we were perfect at the beginning. The genius is that our founders created a system specifically designed to become more perfect over time. They built self-correction into the very fabric of our nation. Karoline reached for a small notebook she had placed on the table. I'd like to share some numbers, if I may. In 1800, about 20% of Americans could vote. Today, it's over 90%. In 1800, life expectancy was about 35 years. Today, it's nearly 80. In 1800, most Americans lived in poverty by today's standards. Today, even Americans below our poverty line have living standards higher than most people throughout human history. She closed the notebook. This progress didn't happen despite our American system. It happened because of it. AOC leaned forward. May I respond? Robert nodded. Please do, Congresswoman. Those improvements came through struggle against power. AOC countered. People fought and died for voting rights, for labor protections, for civil rights. The system didn't just naturally evolve, it was forced to change by movements demanding justice. Karoline nodded, surprising viewers with her agreement. You're absolutely right, Congresswoman. Those movements were essential. But here's the Crucial point. Those movements succeeded because America's founding principles gave them moral authority. She leaned forward slightly. When Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream," he explicitly based that dream on the Declaration of Independence. He didn't reject America's founding promises. He demanded America finally fulfill them. For the first time in the debate, AOC appeared momentarily taken aback. The camera caught her expression changing as she considered this perspective. Karoline continued, her voice growing slightly warmer. When you call for completely reimagining our systems, you're ignoring that our current system has lifted more people out of poverty, created more innovation, and spread more freedom than any other in human history. She gestured toward the American flag backdrop. Is America perfect? Of course not. Do we face serious challenges? Absolutely. But the solution isn't to tear down what works. It's to fix what doesn't. The studio remained silent as Karoline reached for her water glass. The producers in the control room exchanged glances. This wasn't the shouting match they'd expected. It was something potentially more powerful. Robert turned to AOC. Congresswoman, your response? AOC gathered herself. Ms. Leavitt offers a selective reading of history. Yes, America has made progress, but that progress has been unevenly distributed. Black Americans still face systemic racism. Native communities still suffer from historical trauma. Women still earn less than men. She leaned forward, her passion evident. When I say we need to reimagine our systems, I'm talking about building on our values to create something better. Why should Americans accept a healthcare system that bankrupts families? Why should we accept that children go hungry in the wealthiest nation on earth? Karoline listened attentively, nodding at certain points. When AOC finished, Robert turned back to her. Ms. Leavitt? I appreciate the Congresswoman's passion, Karoline said, and I share her concern for Americans who are struggling. Where we differ is in our diagnosis and our prescription. She held up one finger. First, the diagnosis. America's problems today aren't because our founding principles are flawed. They're because we've drifted away from those principles in key areas. A second finger went up. Government has grown far beyond what the founders intended. We've centralized power that was meant to be distributed. We've created dependency where there should be opportunity. A third finger joined the others. And we've stopped teaching our children what makes America exceptional. Not that we're perfect, we never claimed to be, but that we're built on principles that allow us to become better over time. Karoline lowered her hand. As for the prescription, the solution isn't more government control. It's more freedom, more local decision-making, more opportunities for people to build their own American dream. The conversation had shifted. What began as a policy debate had become a discussion about America's fundamental character and future. Viewers at home were commenting on social media about the unusual depth of the exchange. Robert Chen, sensing the power of the moment, decided to dig deeper. Ms. Leavitt, you've spoken about your family's immigrant experience. How does that shape your view of America? Karoline's expression softened. My grandparents came from Lebanon with almost nothing. They didn't speak English well. They faced discrimination, but they never doubted they had made the right choice. She smiled slightly. My grandmother used to say, in America, your yesterday doesn't determine your tomorrow. That's not just a nice saying. It's the lived experience of millions of immigrants who have found freedom and opportunity here. The camera cut to AOC, whose own family had come from Puerto Rico. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Karoline continued, when I hear America being described as fundamentally flawed or broken, I think about my grandmother washing dishes in a restaurant, dreaming of the day her grandchildren would have opportunities she never had. I think about the millions of people around the world who would give anything to come here. Her voice remained steady, but there was undeniable emotion behind her words. America isn't just a place or a government. It's an idea. The idea that ordinary people should be free to determine their own destiny. That idea has transformed the world. The control room producers were signaling to Robert that the segment was running long, but he ignored them. This was too compelling to cut short. "Congresswoman," Robert said, turning to AOC, "does Ms. Leavitt's perspective on America's promise resonate with you at all, given your own family's story?" It was a personal question that momentarily caught AOC off guard. The viewers could see her considering her response carefully. The debate had reached a pivotal moment. The next exchange would determine whether two very different visions of America could find any common ground. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took a moment to gather her thoughts. The personal question about her family's experience had shifted the tone of the debate. The studio remained silent, waiting for her response. "My family's story is also an immigrant story," AOC began, her voice softer than before. "My mother cleaned houses. My father was a small business owner from the Bronx. They worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities." She paused briefly. "So yes, the idea of America as a place of possibility does resonate with me. My disagreement isn't with the American dream. It's with the barriers that prevent too many people from achieving it." Karoline nodded respectfully as AOC continued. "The problem is that today, a child born into poverty has less chance of rising up than in almost any other developed nation. That's not because people aren't working hard enough. It's because the system has been rigged against ordinary Americans." AOC's voice regained its usual passion. "We've allowed corporate interests to dominate our politics. We've accepted massive inequality as normal. We've watched as basic needs like healthcare became luxury items for many families." She leaned forward. "That's why I say we need fundamental change. Not because I don't love America, but because I do." Robert Chen nodded. "Ms. Leavitt, your response?" Karoline had been listening attentively, occasionally making notes. She looked up with a calm expression. "First, I want to acknowledge the Congresswoman's sincere concern for struggling Americans. We share that concern, even if we disagree on solutions." Her tone remained measured. "But I have to challenge the claim that America offers less opportunity than other countries. The data simply doesn't support that." Karoline tapped her notebook. "The United States still leads the world in new business creation, in patents filed and Nobel Prizes won. We remain the top destination for immigrants worldwide. These aren't the hallmarks of a failed system." She looked directly at AOC. "Where I think we're talking past each other is this. You see America's problems and conclude the system is fundamentally flawed. I see the same problems and recognize we've drifted away from the principles that made America successful in the first place." For the first time, Karoline allowed a hint of stronger emotion in her voice. "Free markets didn't create our healthcare crisis. Decades of government intervention distorted the market. Housing isn't unaffordable because of too much freedom. It's because local regulations restrict building and drive up costs." The camera caught AOC starting to interrupt, but Karoline continued her point. "And most importantly, the solution to corporate influence in politics isn't giving government more power. It's limiting government to its proper role so that special interests have less incentive to capture it." AOC shook her head. "That's a convenient narrative, but it ignores reality. Nordic countries have stronger government roles and better outcomes in healthcare, education, and quality of life. They're not failing, they're thriving." Karoline smiled slightly. "I'm glad you mentioned Nordic countries. Sweden tried socialism in the 1970s and 80s. It nearly destroyed their economy. They've spent the last 30 years moving toward free markets, cutting regulations and embracing school choice." She leaned forward. "Denmark's prime minister once asked Americans to stop calling his country socialist. We have a market economy," he said. "We just have a strong safety net. These countries succeed not because of big government, but despite it, because they maintain economic freedom alongside their welfare programs." The exchange was becoming more technical, with both women citing statistics and examples. Robert Chen, sensing the need to bring the conversation back to a broader audience, intervened. "Let's step back for a moment. Ms. Leavitt, earlier you mentioned your grandmother washing dishes and dreaming of a better future for her grandchildren. What would she think of America today?" The question caught Karoline slightly off guard. Her expression softened as she considered it. she would still see it. As the greatest country on earth, Karoline answered, a genuine warmth in her voice. She would recognize our problems. She was never naive about America's challenges. But she would also see the incredible progress we've made. Karoline's eyes brightened. She arrived in a country where women had limited professional opportunities, where discrimination was often legal, where poverty was much more widespread. Today, she would see women as CEOs, as Supreme Court justices, as vice presidents. She would see a nation that, despite its flaws, continues to strive toward its founding ideals. The camera cut to AOC, who was listening intently, her expression thoughtful. "Congresswoman," Robert said, "what about your family? What would your parents say about America today?" AOC considered the question. They would be proud of how far we've come in some ways, but they would also recognize how many people are still struggling with the same problems they faced. Low wages, expensive health care, unaffordable housing. She continued with growing passion. They didn't want just their daughter to succeed. They wanted all hardworking people to have a fair shot. That's not happening for too many Americans today. Karoline nodded. On that point, we agree. Too many Americans are struggling. Where we differ is on the solution. The debate had taken an unexpected turn. Instead of the shouting match viewers had anticipated, they were witnessing something rarer. Two passionate advocates finding moments of connection, even while strongly disagreeing. Robert checked his notes. We have time for one more question. Ms. Leavitt, you've criticized the Congresswoman's statement that America is fundamentally broken. What would be your summary of America's current state? Karoline took a moment to organize her thoughts. The studio was completely silent. America today is a work in progress, just as it has always been, she began. We face serious challenges, from rising costs to cultural divisions. These deserve honest debate and thoughtful solutions. Her voice grew stronger. But America is not broken. We remain the most diverse, dynamic, innovative, generous nation in history. Every day, people risk everything to come here because they know America still offers what much of the world doesn't: the freedom to build your own future. Karoline gestured toward AOC. The Congresswoman and I represent very different visions for America's future. That's okay. The ability to debate these differences openly is itself proof that our system works. She smiled slightly. My vision is of an America that returns to its founding principles: limited government, individual liberty, equal opportunity, personal responsibility. Not because these principles are perfect, but because they've proven more successful at creating human flourishing than any alternative in history. The camera cut to AOC, who was shaking her head slightly, clearly eager to respond. Congresswoman, Robert said, your final thoughts? Ms. Leavitt offers a romantic view of America's past, AOC began. But nostalgia won't solve today's problems. We need bold, structural change to address climate change, healthcare costs, and economic inequality. She leaned forward with intensity. America isn't broken beyond repair, but its promise remains unfulfilled for too many. We can do better. We must do better. And that requires acknowledging where we've fallen short, not just celebrating our successes. The tension in the studio was palpable. Both women had presented their cases with passion and conviction. As Robert prepared to close the segment, viewers at home were already flooding social media with reactions. The debate had not gone as expected. There had been no shouting, no personal attacks. Instead, America had witnessed something increasingly rare in political discourse: a substantive exchange of opposing ideas, conducted with mutual respect. And in that unexpected civility lay the seeds of what would become the most viral political moment of the year. That concludes our discussion tonight, Robert Chen said, turning to the camera. I want to thank both Ms. Leavitt and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez for what has been a remarkably substantive conversation. As the cameras continued rolling for a few final moments, Karoline and AOC exchanged brief handshakes. Their facial expressions remained professional, though viewers would later analyze these final seconds frame by frame on social media. The moment the off-air signal flashed, The studio erupted with activity. Production assistants rushed forward. With phones, makeup artists appeared with touch-up kits, and the show's executive producer approached both women. "That was extraordinary television," he said, barely containing his excitement. "The early numbers suggest our highest viewership in 3 years." Karoline nodded politely while checking her own phone, which was already flooding with notifications. Her communications director, Miguel, pushed through the crowd. "It's blowing up," he said simply, showing her his tablet. "Clips are already viral on every platform." Across the studio, AOC was having a similar conversation with her team. The congresswoman looked slightly frustrated as she scrolled through messages. As Karoline gathered her notes, a junior producer approached nervously. "Ms. Leavitt, we've received requests from 5 major networks for follow-up interviews tomorrow morning, and the Daily Wire wants you for their podcast immediately." "Tell them I'll need to check my schedule," Karoline replied calmly, though inside she felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the kind of moment political communicators dream about. Meanwhile, in homes across America, the debate was being rewatched, analyzed, and shared. In a suburban living room in Ohio, a family of 4 sat discussing what they'd seen. "I didn't expect it to be so civil," the father said, reaching for his laptop. "Let me see what people are saying online." His teenage daughter was already scrolling through social media. "Karoline Leavitt is trending at #1, she reported. "And there's a hashtag called #Worse Calmly Destroys that's going viral." Similar scenes played out in millions of homes. What had been expected to be just another partisan shouting match had instead become something genuinely thought-provoking. Clips of Karoline's measured responses to AOC's criticisms of America were being shared across political lines. Back at the studio, Karoline and her team had moved to a small green room to strategize. Miguel was analyzing the social media response. "It's not just our usual audience," he said, showing her the metrics. "You're getting positive engagement from moderates and even some liberals. The calm approach really worked." Karoline smiled slightly. "I wasn't being strategic, I just believe what I said." Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "So proud of you. Grandma would have loved every word." That message meant more to Karoline than all the viral clips combined. Across the building, AOC was having a more tense conversation with her advisors. Initial feedback suggested that while her passionate arguments had resonated with her base, Karoline's measured approach had appealed to undecided viewers. "We need to be careful how we respond," one advisor cautioned. Attacking her personally now would backfire. She came across as reasonable, even when strongly disagreeing. AOC nodded thoughtfully. Despite their fundamental differences, she had developed a grudging respect for her opponent's tactical skill. By morning, the debate had transcended political media to become a broader cultural moment. Morning shows played clips of the exchange, particularly focusing on Karoline's defense of America's founding principles and her immigrant grandmother's story. As Karoline prepared for a follow-up interview, she received a surprising email. It was from a producer at a network known for its liberal leanings. "Your perspective was compelling, even to those who disagree with your conclusions," the message read. "We'd like to offer you a monthly segment to provide balance to our political coverage." Miguel looked over her shoulder at the message. "That's unexpected," he said. Karoline nodded. Maybe there's still room for respectful disagreement in American politics. As the day progressed, political analysts from both sides weighed in on the debate. Conservative commentators celebrated Karoline's defense of American values, while even liberal analysts acknowledged the effectiveness of her approach. Leavitt demonstrated how to disagree without being disagreeable, one CNN analyst noted. She challenged AOC's fundamental premises without attacking her character or intentions. By afternoon, the White House press secretary was asked about the debate during the daily briefing. "The president believes that respectful political discourse is essential to democracy," she replied. Last night's debate was a refreshing example of how Americans with different views can engage substantively. For Karoline, the most meaningful responses came from ordinary citizens. Her email and social media accounts filled with messages from Americans across the political spectrum. A high school teacher wrote, I'm showing clips to my civics class as an example of effective debate. Thank you for demonstrating that political disagreement doesn't have to be personal. A young conservative woman messaged, "You showed us how to stand firm for our values without stooping to anger or insults. You're the role model we need." Perhaps most surprisingly, a self-described progressive wrote, "I still disagree with most of your positions, but your respect for the conversation made me actually listen to your arguments instead of dismissing them. That rarely happens anymore." 3 days after the debate, as Karoline was preparing for a speaking engagement in New Hampshire, she received an unexpected call. It was AOC. "I want to thank you for keeping the debate focused on ideas rather than personal attacks," the Congresswoman said. "We obviously have fundamental disagreements, but the conversation was productive." Karoline was momentarily surprised. "I appreciate that, Congresswoman. Despite our differences, I think we both want what's best for America. We just have very different ideas about how to get there." There was a brief pause before AOC responded. "I'm participating in a town hall about political discourse next month. Would you consider joining as the conservative voice? The country could use more examples of respectful disagreement." The invitation was unexpected, but intriguing. "I'll check my schedule," Karoline replied. "But yes, I'd be interested in principle." As she ended the call, Karoline reflected on how differently things had turned out from what everyone expected. What was supposed to be a heated clash had instead become a model for political conversation. 1 week after the debate, a national poll revealed something surprising. 78% of Americans who watched the exchange felt that both women had made valid points, even if they ultimately agreed more with one side. In an era of intense polarization, this was remarkable. For Karoline personally, the debate marked a turning point in her public profile. What some had dismissed as a conservative talking head was now recognized as a formidable communicator of ideas. Speaking requests poured in from universities, business groups, and media outlets. During a rare quiet moment at her apartment, Karoline found herself looking at the small American flag on her desk, her grandfather's gift. She thought about how he and her grandmother had come to America with almost nothing, betting everything on this country's promise. "This is still the land of opportunity," she said quietly to herself. "Still worth believing in. Still worth defending." Her phone buzzed with another interview request. Karoline smiled and picked it up. The conversation about America's future was just beginning, and she had much more to say.